Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Well, Arlen Specter becomes a Democrat. What does that mean for Pennsylvania politics? And then healthcare costs and clinical trials. Why does that matter? All of that and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, the big news in Pennsylvania politics this week, Arlen Specter switches parties. It hasn't been done before in modern history. It may not have been done ever before by a sitting United States Senator. Joining me to talk about this and more, John Micek with the Allentown Morning Call, Tony Romeo, KYW, and KDKA Radio. They're both sitting in front of me. John Micek, Tony Romeo, look, you guys have been covering state politics for a long time. Tony, were you stunned by this after he said that he wouldn't change for weeks?
Stunned initially, but then after a couple of seconds, it's like, well, yeah, I guess I should have expected this. I mean, yeah, the pressure on him was enormous. He had to be looking at the polling data that showed that he was going to have a much easier time in the general election than he was in his own primary. And, you know, no matter how many times somebody in a situation like that says, oh, no, I'm okay with the status quo, you know the gears have to be turning in their head.
Now, John, he had just gone around the state within the past 2 weeks reassuring Republicans that he would run. He said, you know, he turned down entreaties from Governor Rendell. He turned down entreaties from Vice President Biden. 14 calls, and now we learn even President Obama put the call into Arlen Specter to say change. Yeah. Big surprise to you?
I'm with Tony on this one. Initially, yeah. I mean, I was in the Capitol Rotunda with him less than 24 hours beforehand where he said he was planning on running strong and was staying in the race. Of course, he didn't say which party he intended to run in at the time, but I guess we should have pressed for clarification on that. Look, I mean, it is an extraordinary thing. There's no doubt about it, with profound implications for the state Republicans and the national Republicans. You know, what was the tipping point? It was, you know, it probably came down to guarantees about seniority and guarantees about what kind of help he was going to get in the campaign. Harry Reid, Senate Majority Leader, said yesterday that Senator Specter will be treated as if he were a Democrat elected in 1980, which means he slides into the #2 spot on the Appropriations Committee. Right. So if Senator Inoue of Hawaii decides to pack it in, bang, Senator Specter is chairman of the Appropriations Committee.
And they could give him a subcommittee assignment within Appropriations. That's been rumored as well.
One would expect, yeah.
One would expect. Tony, look, you're the city suburban guy. You're a radio station, you know, cover. Suburban Republicans have been becoming Democrats anyway. Specter's great strength is down in the Philadelphia region. Is this going to upset suburban Republicans, or are they just going to sort of roll with it, and many of them continue to support him as they have in the past? What do you think?
Oh, well, I don't even talk about the ordinary voter.
Yeah, the ordinary voter.
Somehow I don't think that the ordinary voter is going to be too ruffled by this. You know, obviously for the party power structure, this is a seismic shift.
Right.
But for the rank and file, I mean, I think people generally do vote, especially for somebody like Specter who's been around for so long. People like him or they don't.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about the thing. You brought up a very good point. I noticed that party leaders range from the comments from disappointment to good riddance. So it clearly shows that there's no kind of consensus about whether Senator Specter was better off, you know, the Republicans wanted him or didn't want him. Is that?
Well, I do think that you have to take whatever Republican party leaders are saying with a grain of salt. Yeah. They are in the difficult position here of putting lipstick on the proverbial pig. Right. They've got to dress up the situation. They've got to put some spin on it, and I'm not saying that in a derisive way. If they're in a difficult spot, anything they say is going to look self-serving. Right. So what else can you say, I think?
All right, let's go to the implications. Let's talk about the Republicans. It is now rumored that all of these people will come out of the woodwork. They didn't want to run against Arlen. Pat Toomey, who narrowly lost to him, is the front runner, not prohibitively so. Tom Ridge has been mentioned. Jim Gerlach, the congressman from the 6th Congressional District, thought of as a potential gubernatorial. What's your sense? Does this open it up?
This does blow the Republican primary field wide open. You know, this was seen primarily as like a death match between Pat Toomey and Arlen Specter, reprising their very bitter election from 2004. Senator Specter's exit from the primary stage, that does create an opportunity for some other more mainline Republican to step in to run against him. We've heard Mr. Gerlach being mentioned. Senator Joe Scarnati, the lieutenant governor / Senate president pro tempore, has been mentioned. He told me yesterday he's not thinking about it until the Senate is done with the budget. So,
and we're going to talk about that. Maybe not until 2010.
But leaving the door open to a potential run. I think it could be a potential free-for-all.
All right, let's switch to the Democratic Party. Representative Josh Shapiro, you've covered him, a bright rising star in the Democratic Party, was thinking about running. He says no, he won't run. Governor Rendell this week said, I'm going to clear the field if I can, even dismissing the candidacy of his former deputy mayor, head of the Constitution Center, his appointee to the State Board of Education, Joe Torsella. Torsella raised $600,000. Can Rendell get him out? What do you think?
Well, does it matter if he does?
Oh, good point.
And I mean, the fact of the matter is that outside of southeastern Pennsylvania, I don't know what kind of profile Torsella has. I mean, the bottom line is I think Specter is the Democratic nominee unless a figure of a stature comparable to Tom Ridge as a Republican, unless a Democratic figure like that steps in to challenge Specter.
Yeah, but who could that be? I mean, look, the one statewide Democrat who will be on next week's show, by the way, the current Auditor General, Wagner, has said, nah, Senate probably not, right? Governor, obviously, Jack Wagner, very popular, big vote getter. But he's not running, so who would the Democrats have? It's hard to think of a name, isn't it?
And the one Democrat who already has the gig, and that's Bob Casey. There's nobody of comparable stature, really, to step into this contest.
All right, we're talking about the big news of the past weeks, maybe the big news of this new century. Senator Specter switches parties. Back with that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program with John Micek and Tony Romeo, journalists, both of you journalists. We're chatting about Senator Specter, huge decision he made this week to leave the Democratic Party, shocked the state, shocked the nation. Is shock too strong a word? I mean, he flirted with it. You're both looking at each other. John, go ahead.
As I said at the top of the show, I just think momentarily.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of these things where it had come up before, and months ago, and then you'd be asked about it periodically.
But this is
it was something
Pennsylvania.
in the back of your mind. You thought, well, you sort of forgot about it. So when it comes up, you're initially surprised.
Yeah, but this is Pennsylvania, guys. This doesn't happen in our state, right?
This is a risk-averse state. I think you can put that safely. But, there were a lot of people yesterday who were saying this was a naked political calculus on the part of Arlen Specter. And he even said so as much. His primary chances were bleak. But, I think it speaks, though, to deeper fissures within the state party, within the national party. I mean, it's been no secret that the Republicans have been tacking to the right ever since the election of President Obama. And they also had made no secret of the fact that they'd wanted Mr. Specter out of the party. So, I mean, if people start telling you often enough that they want you to leave, you're not going to hang out at a cocktail party where everyone's glaring at you. Eventually, you're going to bug out.
I do think you have to point out, though, that this is a risk-averse state. Also, you're talking about a risk-averse candidate. You're talking about a guy who switched parties before, a long time ago.
But
he switched parties.
1966.
But when it was politically expedient.
Yeah, and also, I mean, look, will both of you agree? This is pure and simple a political calculation for Senator Specter to save his political life. I mean, is that about?
I think that's most of it. I mean, I
agree. I don't think that's all of it. I think it's probably 85% of it.
I think you also alluded
15% ideology behind it.
You also alluded to the idea that the Democrats in Washington made it very clear that they were going to, hand him the keys to the Cadillac.
Now, we're going to go to another. You guys have covered the budget. We got to get to that and a couple of other things in the time we have remaining. But here's the question: Is Senator Specter better positioned to win a sixth term because of what he did last week? Or not?
It's hard to say because it all depends on who jumps into the field.
I understand.
Yeah, at first blush it seems yes,
okay.
But if there's a strong Republican who emerges or a Democrat who emerges.
Tom Ridge, for example, on the Republican side. Go ahead.
Senator Specter's going to have to work really hard with the Democratic rank and file now, the county leaders, the power structure to prove that he's serious. But unless, somebody of towering stature emerges, it looks like, it has bolstered his chances.
All right, let's switch subjects. I want to talk about the deficit. It's huge, $2.3 billion. Now Republicans and Democrats in the legislature say, well, it could be 2.7, it could be 2.8, it could reach $3 billion. Tony, they don't seem to be moving very quickly. Is this normal business over there?
It seems to me to be that way. And my colleague here asked the governor about this last week, and the governor sort of jumped ugly on him. Saying
Governor Rendell took off after the wildebeest?
No. He said that he thought that there was a sense of urgency in the Capitol about the budget, and I don't sense that. There's a lot of people talking about it, but I don't sense that people are knuckling down. I don't know. I haven't heard about any backroom meetings where staffers and legislative leaders are talking about this.
And we always know that's a sign they're doing something, right, John?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You can always judge.
Did he jump ugly with you?
Yeah, I mean, he got a little ticked off.
Well, your job is to hold their politicians
insisted
that
they were burning the midnight oil or whatever cliche you want to employ on this. But you can always sort of tell in the Capitol when things have taken that turn towards we really got to get this done. There's a palpable energy in the building.
And you don't see that yet.
That's not there yet. Which is not to say that staff aren't meeting and discussing things.
Now hold on a minute. The Republicans are unveiling a budget $27.5 billion lower than this year's budget. The Senate Republicans.
Yeah, but you got to understand that's the kind of stuff that always happens this time of year.
Good point.
I mean, in the House, when the Republicans ran the House, they used to do what they called the fake budget.
Yeah.
They would actually pass a budget bill right about this time of year, but you wouldn't get a budget for 3 months.
And you knew that wasn't going to be the real budget. All right, before we go to break, and then I want to come back and talk about cell phones and all of that, I have to get a clarification on one thing. Governor Rendell the other week, when he was meeting with you all about the stimulus, said that you run like a pack, you journalists, and he referred to you as wildebeest. What's that? Is that just Governor Ed being Governor Ed?
Governor, it's Rendell being Rendell. He has a love-hate, mostly hate relationship with the press. No, a love-hate relationship with the Capitol.
I've always thought he doesn't like us collectively, but likes us individually.
All right, we're out of here. We'll be back with another. I want to talk about the cell phone ban and where all that stands following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. All right, within the last week or so, we've had this big debate, Tony, in the legislature about a cell phone ban. Josh Shapiro wanted it completely banned. Primary offense, now it's all changed. Where does all that stand?
It's kind of a muddle, but what we got right now is that what we found out over the last week was that the House, by a narrow margin, wasn't ready to vote for a cell phone ban as a primary offense. They did, however, vote on a bill that would create it as a primary offense for junior drivers, but for the rest of the drivers, adult drivers, it would be a secondary offense, meaning you would have to be pulled over for something else.
And then if you were on a cell phone, is that like the seatbelt deal as a secondary
offense, but also a whole range of other behaviors, putting on makeup or shaving or eating food or whatever, reading a newspaper, you could get an additional fine on top of that. The interesting thing was that the day after the House voted for that bill, the Senate Transportation Committee then passed a bill that would only make texting while driving a secondary offense. So the Senate is not as far along as the House.
So, John, as Tony points out, a muddle in your discussion.
A muddle in the Pennsylvania legislature.
Oh, yeah, something
What
new.
are the odds, yeah.
Is there anything going to come out of this?
I mean, this is an issue
that's
been banging around for nigh on a decade now. In fact, I remember writing the very first stories about this back in 1999 when it began being discussed. You know, the bill's out of the House now. The texting bill made it out of the Senate Transportation Committee. Rob Wunderling, who chairs the Senate Transportation Committee, a guy from our neck, who represents our neck of the woods, has made it pretty clear that in his universe of priorities, this is, you know, way down the food chain because he's primarily preoccupied with the stimulus money and taking care of transportation and infrastructure and that kind of stuff. There doesn't seem to be any particular sense of urgency about it. I mean, you know, the bill could clear the Senate, but it's one of these things where, like, if it happens, it'll be like, all right.
So the important thing, I think, is to point out is that the cell phone ban as a primary offense only lost by a few votes. And there were people who said, look, I'm just not ready to vote for this right now. But the Senate, I think, would not be as likely to go along with it.
Yeah, I heard some commentary, you know, on, I think, NPR, where there was some study that showed there's no correlation or there's no big difference between handheld and you know, devices that, you know, are embedded like in the car for listening, that there was no accident different, you know what I mean, no difference in accidents. I'm not.
The weird thing about this is one of these things where the legislature is actually sort of lagging the public. I mean, if you look at the polling data,
I did a poll on it.
You did it. Quinnipiac did it. You know, if you look at the public polling data, most drivers think that this is a good idea. The vote margin in the House indicates that, you know, they're kind of starting to come around on this. It may take another go.
Okay. All right. That's it. Thanks. Great update. Healthcare cost clinical trials coming up. See you after the break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Now joining me is Greg Katshir. He is a trustee with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, the Central Pennsylvania chapter. Do I have that right, Greg?
Central Pennsylvania chapter.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about certain kinds of diseases and clinical trials and how they get paid for by insurance companies, and how I think your organization would like to advance the cause of medicine and healthcare coverage for folks that have these pretty serious diseases. You know, people talk a lot about, you know, going to a doctor and getting coverage, you know, having a problem, getting the coverage, and then they talk about clinical trials and whether folks subject themselves or, you know, agree to go through clinical trials. What's a clinical trial? Just, I mean, let's start with sort of the simple.
Again, I'm an attorney, not a physician. I can give kind of a lay term.
That's fine.
That's
all we want to know. Go ahead.
A clinical trial is kind of a last resort. A patient has gone through the regular care, in this case, regular cancer care, chemotherapy, radiation, and the treatment doesn't seem to work. They then move to a clinical trial, which is often sponsored by a drug company or, and sometimes the government pays
funded
for
or
correct.
Yeah, go ahead.
They are not proven treatments. But
some are experimental.
Experimental,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
They're often a last resort.
Right. So in other words, and you know, I think almost everybody must know someone in their life, you know, has come down with one of these horrible diseases that have run the gamut. I mean, you know, the doctor, you know, physicians look at them and says, well, this is a, you know, but here, and even doctors, I know doctors have said, here's some studies that are being done, clinical trials, and put their own patients in them, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Doctors run out of options, and they have to move a patient to a clinical trial to save their lives.
All right, now here's where the cost of the healthcare treatment and clinical trials comes into play. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, go ahead.
As we discussed, the clinical trials are most often paid by drug companies or by the government in some instances. There's a bill currently in the Pennsylvania Senate right now. It's passed through the the House unanimously last March. It's called the Cancer Clinical Trial Act. And what it would require is insurance companies to pay for routine health care costs of patients who are in a clinical trial. Currently, these routine health care costs are nursing services, some inpatient care, some prescription drugs that an insurance company can now, when a patient is in a clinical trial, decide not to pay. Those are always paid when the patient is going through routine cancer care or any other care. But as soon as they get into the clinical trial,
and the debate would center around, because it's not a conventional or accepted, treatment practice, and it's experimental. That's where some companies draw the line and say, well, we're not going to cover that.
Right.
Go ahead.
But what is the clinical trial costs are all covered.
They're all covered.
Yeah, these are just some additional. These are just additional costs.
Drug coverage.
Correct. Some nursing services, inpatient care that the patient has already paid for when he purchased the coverage. It's covered during regular care, regular cancer treatment, but not during a clinical trial.
Now, hold on a minute. Something very surprising you told me. This passed the House. How? Unanimously. Unanimous. The Pennsylvania House.
It did. How about that?
I mean, normally that's something not easy to achieve.
Apparently somebody thinks it's a good thing.
Yeah, well, yeah. How about
a good number of people?
Yeah, 200. Well, there probably weren't 203 people there. So it's over in the Senate. What's going on in the Senate with it?
Right now, it just passed in March. And I guess it's moved on. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know exactly where it stands right now.
Okay. So, but if this were to, it begs sort of another question. If we go to another kind of health care coverage, something that President Obama, and the Congress might pass, I mean, presumably it could be covered in that way as well. But at the moment, this is the best that you think is available. This particular piece of legislation.
Yeah. We don't believe it adds additional cost to the insurance companies, but it's certainly from the Leukemia Lymphoma Society standpoint. Number one, it can save individual lives when they go to a clinical trial. A lot of folks decide not to go into a clinical trial because they realize that they have to pay for these routine costs, and they just can't do it.
Thanks for coming in. Thanks for the update. And you all, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week for another edition. And as always, stay well.